Hey, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, however you are attending, watching, listening. Welcome to Grace Church. My name is Aaron, and this week's a little special. Next week, we are doing our Be Rich campaign. And to explain more about what Be Rich is, let's watch this short video.
Hello from Atlanta, and welcome to our annual extravaganza of generosity, Be Rich. You're hearing this because your church believes, as I do, that extravagant generosity toward others is the best response to God's extravagant generosity towards all of us. And Be Rich aims to do exactly that. It's an opportunity for all of us to give and to serve and to love in Jesus' name. Now, since the launch of Be Rich back in 2007, you, along with thousands and thousands of people just like you, have served in our local communities, get this, over 560,000 hours. And collectively, we've given over $81 million away. And the beauty is that every single dollar given to Be Rich is given away to our nonprofit partners, both locally and all around the world. Now, if this is your first time joining us, our goal every year at Be Rich is the same. It's 100% participation. That is, we want every adult and every student to participate. And here's why. Most of us want to make a difference, but sometimes we just don't know how. And Be Rich makes it simple. It makes it simple for you to make a difference, and then it makes it possible for us collectively to make a really big difference together. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you in advance for choosing to give and serve and to love in Jesus' name. I look forward, like I hope you do, to seeing the impact that we make together.
Well, and there you have it, and we're going to talk about generosity, giving, serving, and loving our community, because not just it's the right thing to do, it is what Jesus has commanded, and it's how the church gains influence. And if you want to know, if you've ever asked yourself, man, how much influence does Christianity have over the world and have over, the West and even over the United States? And I'm not talking about Christian subculture, but just in everyday life. How much Christianity is baked into culture? I want you to look, if you ever start asking yourself that, I want you to look at how maybe you or someone else would respond to certain philosophies that go against the Christian philosophy, the Christian ethic. And these are popular philosophies. In fact, we're baked in to the Western world, as long before America was around, but baked into the Western world. And you're going to see how contrary to the Christian faith and the Christian ethic they are, because of what Christianity's done. In fact, Aristotle, you've heard of Aristotle, a great philosopher and a great teacher. He said this about people. If they are in a state, if their work is the use of the body, and if this is the best that can come from them, they are slaves by nature. For them, it is better to be ruled in accordance with this sort of rule, if such is the case from other things mentioned. He says, man, he said, there are just some people that they're meant to be slaves, and that's all they're meant to be. How does that make you feel? How does that sit with you? How would that sit with any of your friends? But in fact, that was widespread. That was thought to be absolutely true. And in fact, he would go on to say that even if you weren't born to be a slave, if you weren't, there's certain people that are born to be a slave. He said, but if you became a slave through either losing a war, wrong place at the wrong time, your tribe got conquered by another tribe, you got overtaken, you lost all of your money, and you became a slave because of debt. He would go on to say, Aristotle would go on to say, you became a slave not because you were born to be it, but because you deserved it. Now, how does that sound? And does that sounds contrary to the Western world as it is today. In fact, in the 6th century BC, the Delphic canon talks about virtue. And that they talk about, and some of the virtues are similar to ours, but there are going to be some of the virtues that when I mention them, when I mention this one specifically, you may bristle. The love of honor was a high virtue. Do you love honor? Do you love the praises of others, whether you know them or not? Do you love that, right? Seeking self-honor was a high virtue, and avoiding humiliation at all cost. How do you feel about that? Or Seneca, the great scholar, the great ruler. Seneca talked about mercy and pardoning people. He said, pardon is given to a man who ought to be punished, but a wise man does nothing that he ought not to do. To do so, omits to do nothing which he ought not to do. Therefore, he does not remit punishment, though he ought to exact. So what he's saying is, like, pardon should not be given. So, like, if a person didn't do anything, then you should pardon him. But if a person did something, to pardon him, to show mercy, right? When you give somebody what they don't deserve, then you are just as guilty as they are. But we have this philosophy. So even before that, in 7th century BC, the prophet Micah writes, inspired by God, writes this sentence, talking about God speaking to humankind. And he says in Micah 6, verse 8, he has told you, O man. Oh, some versions will say, "O mortal, what is good?" So listen up. God has told you what is good, and he's going to say it again. What does the Lord require of you? So what's the full extent that God requires of you? He says, but to do justice and love kindness and walk humbly with your God. Now, I don't know that you have to be a Christian to appreciate that. I don't know that you have to be a religious person to say, oh, man, justice, mercy, and humility, right? Kindness there. Kindness can be translated as kindness or mercy. Giving someone what they don't deserve. And, justice is how do you treat people who are people and walk around, they bear the image of God. And mercy is, do you give people the things that they don't deserve? Do you give them better than they deserve? And do you walk humbly, right, in humility? You see, almost 3,000 years later, we would agree with that. And there were lots of things that were written in the middle that really were this was a minority view. This Micah 6:8 is a minority view, but we see the teaching of Aristotle and Delphi and Seneca. Those were the majority views. And if you ever wonder, how did we get to here? It's this influence of Christianity. Now, I will say that I've heard that there's a new version out here. That there's a new version of this Micah verse. I've never seen it, but it goes like this. What does God require of you? To do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God, except when you disagree with people, especially over political issues and issues of preference, then you can act and react like everyone else. Now, I've never seen this version, but I know it's real. Why do I know that? Because I see the way people act. It exists. And as we get closer to this lead up to the 2024 elections, this is not, this type of attitude is not going to decrease. It is absolutely going to increase. And some people say, well, you know what, Aaron? You know, by Christmas of 2024, it'll go back to normal. And there's a caveat there, too, that says if my guy or my gal wins. You see, I'm going to tell you when we get into these when we get into political seasons, when we get into, where preference becomes our God, our King, where our view becomes everything, it gets hard around here. Because I don't know if you know this, but Grace Church is a very politically diverse, and we're even theologically diverse. If we took a survey of people politically, where they stood politically, and we even took a survey of where people stood theologically on, I wouldn't probably say the majority of the majors, but a lot of the minors, you would wonder who you're sitting next to, who you're singing next to, who you attend church with, who's watching online with you. And you might be shocked to the point where you might be, you might just say, you know what, how can someone believe that? Or how can someone not believe this? How can someone hold this view or not hold this view and still be a Christian? How can you do that? You see, political disagreements and theological disagreements, especially amongst non-essential things, are fueled by, almost always fueled by, divergent life experiences. Your life and somebody else's life, they have different experience, like completely different. Like I grew up in the country, in a small town, not even the country. I knew people that grew up in the country, and their life was very different than mine. Growing up in a little town versus growing up in a big city versus growing up in the north or the south or overseas, or growing up a different race or a different religion or a different, you name it, right? Upper class, middle class, lower class, high class, no class. You see, these disagreements that we have, especially politically, they come from divergent life experiences, not what we tend to assign them as low IQ or a lack of character. We tend to do that. How can somebody how can you be so stupid to believe this? How can you be so stupid to not believe this? How can you must be of low moral character to not be for the things I'm for and against the things I'm against. And when you assume that, that person has got it all wrong and surely can't hold those views and be a Christian, you are doing the exact opposite thing that the prophet Micah tells you and tells me to do. You are not being just. You are not giving mercy, and you are not walking humbly. In fact, what you're doing is you're showing how immature you are. Now, what you're saying is here's why it's immature. Because you're saying, listen, I know everything about you person that disagrees with me, that thinks differently, that holds a different opinion. I know everything about you. I know your life experience. I know that you are just interpreting everything wrong, and probably you're dumb, and maybe you're just a terrible person. And when you do that, not only are you acting differently in opposition to how Micah calls us to act, but you're also acting in contrary to how God has treated you and me. You see, Jesus did this beautiful thing is he knows me. He knows everything about me. He knows everything I've ever thought, everything I've ever said. I had somebody one time said, man, Aaron, you're like no pastor I've ever met. You just say everything that you think. And I thought, oh gosh, no, I don't. Sadly, you're getting the edited, filtered view of me. I mean, I was surprised that he thought that. He goes, oh my gosh, he was floored too. I had a seminary professor one time tell me, Dr. Hanna said, he told all the class, be very glad that hiring committees and church boards can't read your thoughts, or all of you would be fired all the time. See, Jesus knows all that. Jesus knows every bad thing I've ever done. He knows the bad stuff I did today. He knows the bad stuff that I'm going to do tomorrow. Jesus knows all of that, and you know what he did? He could have written me off like we tend to write off other people. He could have said, Aaron, you're so dumb. Aaron, you're so wrong, and you really are a terrible person, and he would not be wrong. And he could have summed me up and written me off, but he didn't. He didn't do that to me. And he didn't do that to you. Or to people that don't believe the way that you believe, or the people that don't think the way you think, or the people that don't vote for the way that you vote, or the people that have a completely different mindset of the end times, or how church should look, or whatever. You see, Jesus did exactly what Micah said God requires of us. He provided ultimate justice. He provided ultimate mercy and ultimate humility. Like, I want you, if you look at his life, if you look at the Gospels, you will see his brand of justice and his brand of mercy and his brand of humility was different than anything. Jesus, read the Gospels, Jesus disagreed with almost everybody that spoke to him. I mean, and who, if you're having a disagreement with Jesus, who's wrong? It's you. Jesus disagreed with his disciples. He had to rebuke them. The Pharisees and Sadducees didn't know. There's very few people with whom he agreed. Politically, very few with whom he agreed theologically. And he could have summed them up and written them off. But he doesn't. How does he respond? He responds with love and an invitation to follow him. And that's our model. You see, we can disagree and we can still love one another unconditionally, because Jesus modeled it for us to imitate. Our differences are an opportunity to underscore our commitment to Jesus. You see, the bigger our differences that we overcome with love, the bigger the political divide, the bigger the theological divide that we still come together and we overcome with love, the brighter our light shines to the world around us. You see, getting along with people that are just like you isn't amazing. It's normal. It's what everybody else does. Getting along with people that vote like you and believe like you and serve like you and live like you and do the things that you do, that is not amazing. Everyone does that. From the best to the worst. In fact, Jesus said it. We talked about it in Reactions Speak Louder Than Words. That if you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Jesus is saying, it's not amazing to love people that love you, even tax collectors, the worst. No, maybe you don't care about tax collectors. Maybe you think they're fine people. You might be one. I want you to think about the worst person that you know, the worst group of people, gang members, Nazis, Democrats, Republicans, the worst kind of people. I don't know, whatever it is. Methodists. Whatever you want to fill in there, right? Like, he says, they love people that love them. And if they do that and you do that, then you're just like them. If you only get along with people, oh man, you should see Betty. She is so great. She loves everybody that loves her. Oh man, Jim's incredible. He is so kind to everybody that is just like him. But if you want to be like Jesus, if you want to be like Jesus and like God, then Jesus tells you, he says, if you want, I want you to be like God. I want you to be like God in one of the ways that you can imitate him, and not all powerful and all knowing and all every place all at once. If you want to be like God, there's one way you can do that. Is I want you to do good for everyone. I want you to do good for everyone. I want you to do good for people that aren't like you and for people that don't like you. And by doing that, you can be perfect as God is perfect. He said, who sends the rain on the evil and the just. And so when we are willing to get uncomfortable and hang out with people that aren't like us, or people who don't like us, and when we are able to give what is most precious to people who may not appreciate it, and when we are able to even come alongside and worship beside people who theologically differ from us, and we are able to serve beside people that may not be where we're at theologically, maturity-wise, or maybe just don't even like us because we just don't get along. If we're able to do that, then it gives us, as Christians, it gives us credibility. But it makes it messy because love is messy. Because one of the things that we have to, and I want to tell you, as a guy that talks for a living, one of the things I have to watch out is that I don't try to convince you. If you have a theological difference, well, I think this, my job is not to try to convince you as a Christian. Now, maybe while I'm up here on stage, I'm going to try to convince you of a point. I'm doing that right now, so do as I say, not as I do kind of thing. I don't know. But when it comes to relationships, I had a guy just yesterday, he said, Aaron, I think that we're living in the last days. And so I pushed him a little, what do you mean by that? And he thought really close. Really close. And personally, I'm a little ambivalent. I have no strong feelings either way. But my job isn't to convince him that he's right, that he's wrong, and I'm right. And his job is not to convince me, because my job is to love him unconditionally. Even though we're far apart on this. You see, sometimes we are determined to convince, but sometimes we're determined to withdraw. And that's not our job either, is to withdraw. Sometimes somebody will bring up something. They'll bring up something political, something religious, something relational, and you just go, I've got to get out of here. I've got to leave. Our job is to love unconditionally. You can state your point, and you can have a conversation, but your job is to love unconditionally. In fact, the New Testament is full of this. It says that we are to love one another, to carry one another's burdens, to encourage one another, to serve one another. You know what's not in there is that we are not commanded to come to an agreement over solutions to problems. That's not in there. Jesus doesn't command us to agree on solutions, and that's one of the beautiful things about Christianity. It's one of the beautiful things about it, because if love is the highest order of things, then we can disagree immensely. We can disagree philosophically, we can disagree tactically, we can disagree strategically, but if love is the highest order, then we can all get along. We can all work together. We can do so in a way that is loving, because Jesus does command us to love one another. And this is why Be Rich is important. We come together. We come together once a year with a bunch of churches around the nation to give and serve and love our local community. Churches that don't look like us, that don't act like us, huge churches, tiny churches, but all these churches have something in common. We want to remind our communities that everyone matters to God, whether God matters to them. We want to remind everybody that. And why we call it Be Rich, it's pretty simple. Because Paul wrote to a young pastor named Timothy in 1 Timothy. He wrote a letter to him, and he says, he said, I want you to instruct some people on some certain things. And in chapter 6, verse 17, he says, as for the rich in this present age, charge them not to be haughty, nor to set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. They are to do good and to be rich in good works and be generous and ready to share. Now, what he means, because rich, when he wrote this, rich meant something very different than it does today. You think rich, well, I'm not rich, I don't have a yacht. Think about this. If you park your car in a garage, you have a house for your car. That's rich. Really what rich meant back in the day is if you had anything extra than what you needed, you should share. And so we encourage you, Andy said we want 100% participation. We want you to be rich with good deeds. We want you to be rich in generosity. And we want you to be rich in sharing with those in need. You see, it's one thing for us to be a church that's about us. Now, we should love one another. We should love our brothers and sisters in Christ. But we should also be loving our community, because that's what changed the world. That's what got people to say, you know what, Aristotle, I don't think people were born to be slaves. You know what, Delphi, I don't think the love of honor is the highest virtue. You know what, Seneca, I don't think mercy should be condemned. It was the way that we loved the community. And so would you show our community here in Albuquerque that we are for them? That we are for them, and God is for them, even if they're not for us. If they go, you know what, that church thing, I don't really think so. Oh, that God, God, whatever, I don't know. I don't even really know if he believes. If I believe in him, some old man in the sky. We want to show them no matter what they think about God, he loves them. And no matter what they think about us, we are for them. And so we're partnering with a couple of organizations. The first one is the primary one. It's Feed New Mexico Kids. Feed New Mexico Kids, we are, last year we had 100 kids that we fed. I have we use, it's a 1 gallon Ziploc bag that is full of snacks that we give to kids for the weekend. These are all kids that are experiencing food scarcity, right? They have food insecurity over the weekends. And it's packed with snacks that's not, it's not just a bunch of candy and bubble gum. It's snacks that keep their bellies fuller longer. So there's some science behind it, but it can easily be opened, made, and eaten by a young child. Because sometimes they don't have electricity. Sometimes the power gets shut off. They can't use the stove. Sometimes they have to hide it, or else other people in their family will come and take it from them. Each Ziploc bag costs $5.50. That's what it costs to feed one kid per week. Feed New Mexico Kids here in New Mexico, this organization, they feed almost 2,000 kids every single week throughout the entire school year, every Friday. They make about 7,200 snack packs per month. And I don't know if you know this, but 1 in 5 kids here in this state, 1 in 5 kids don't know where their next meal is coming from if they're not getting it from school. New Mexico is number 3 in the nation for food insecurity, and there's 100,000 kids in New Mexico. A kid that is hungry is 2 times more likely to repeat a grade. They are 3 times as likely to get suspended, and they are 5 times more likely to commit suicide. We've done this for a while now here at Grace. We're doubling down on it because we have seen it make a difference. In fact, we had some kids say, how did it help you? And some kids have answered, it helps me not go hungry. They help the snacks, they help me sleep because I'm not hungry anymore. I learn better, I'm not hungry. It helps me and my dad when we have no money for food. I get mad when I'm hungry, so the snack pack helps me eat before I get angry. When my mom and dad aren't home, I can eat. This one kid gets me energy and makes me happy and hyper. One kid writes, sometimes it's the only meal I get on the weekends. Another one, right? We had food on the weekend when mom didn't have cash. And one kid writes, it helps us eat and be alive. So we're partnering with Feed New Mexico Kids. Listen, they may never know this meal comes from Grace Church, or if they do, they might have forgotten it. We don't give it to them with a presentation of the gospel every time. We give them no strings attached generosity. The other group that we're partnering with here is not a nonprofit, it's Christian Brothers Automotive, because every year they do through churches, they do a National Service Day where we can help provide folks to go and receive light maintenance, oil changes to help people's car. When people don't have a car, they can't get to work. They lose their job. When they don't have a car, sometimes it's not only people's transportation, it's also their housing. And Christian Brothers is committed to making a difference in this community. And so we work with them. We help provide, we vet people, we provide them. When the families show up to get their cars worked on, we pray for folks. We feed them popcorn, and we do all kinds of things. And so we're working with those two organizations this year to make a difference in the lives of people here in Albuquerque. And so we're asking you to help. Very simple, it's this. Would you give, would you serve, and then would you love your community by giving and serving? Would you give, would you be rich in good works and in generosity? If you go to the website, gracechurchabq.org/be rich, you'll find a place, or you go on the app, you'll find a place to give $39.95. Because we think that's, giving $40, you're going to spend more than that on a meal out. You're going to spend more than that when you go to Target buying silly stuff. You're going to spend more on that. On Amazon, that was a few years ago, since they've started this. A few years ago, that was the average that a person made on an online purchase. So would you, instead of that online purchase this week, would you give $39.95? 100% of what you give to Be Rich through that link goes to these programs. Christian Brothers takes nothing. Feed New Mexico Kids takes nothing. Right? All the money is going to go and help the people where they need it. Would you do that? Now, some of you have never given to Grace, and that's okay. But would you give to Grace? Would you give to Be Rich? We're keeping none of it. We're covering the process. We're covering the any fees there are. We're covering the accounting. We're covering that kind of stuff. You can also go there and volunteer, but we're going to talk about that next week. So would you give $39.95? Because sometimes I think about it now and I think, some people don't have the greatest, even though they really, they like these values, humility, justice, mercy, they don't like Christianity. And I think it's because we've gotten away. So could we change somebody's mind? Could we make a difference in a family, in the life of a family? Could we help someone and get back to our own roots of raising the reputation of Jesus and being like him? Because I read in Philippians, do nothing out of selfish ambition or conceit. Nope, so sorry, Delphi. But in humility, count others more significant than yourself. Sorry, Seneca. Let each one of you not only look after his own interests, but also to the interest of others. Have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus. And just says Jesus emptied himself, and he took on the form of a servant, being in the likeness of man, and he humbled himself, becoming obedient. Would you give? Would you be like Jesus? So ready, set, be rich. See you guys next week.